The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Hello again and welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr, where every week we speak to Olympic champions, world number ones, or former world record holders, or current world record holders in fact, to find out what they do differently from the rest of us to become the very best in their fields. Yes, these are gold medalists. These are the people who reach the pinnacles of their sports. And I'm delighted to say that this week I got to speak to Callum Skinner. He was part of the British team that won the team sprint at the Rio de Janeiro Games in 2016. He also won a silver medal in the individual sprint, losing to his friend and roommate Jason Kenny. And that's one of the things we get to talk about on this week's podcast with Callum. He discusses how him and Jason were preparing leading up just hours before their big final in that team sprint in Rio de Janeiro, and the way they would tease each other just before they went to bed. It's really funny stuff there with Callum. He talks about how they would cope with the pressure at being at the games, how they play video games such as Civilization, and then he talks about all of his training and his diet and everything which goes into making an Olympic champion. Plus, it gets a little bit deeper when Callum talks about how he found a lump on his neck and he was diagnosed by various doctors that they thought it could be cancerous, but fortunately for Callum, he got the all clear. It wasn't cancerous, and he went on to become an Olympic gold medalist. So we learn from Callum exactly how he was able to cope with that whole experience and move on to even greater things. It's a really good chat with Callum Skinner. It's coming up in just a moment, but I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is one of the leading suppliers of audiobooks in the world. They've got over 180,000 titles to choose from. I recently listened to Arianna Huffington's Thrive, a very good book. I'd recommend you listen to it. And guess what? You can do it for free. Yes, Audible are giving you the chance to try out their service for 30 days for free. Nada, nothing. Cost you nothing for those 30 days. And you will get a free audio book to download. Perhaps that could be Arianna Huffington's book, Thrive. To do that, all you've got to do is go to audibletrial.com/best. That's audibletrial.com/best to test out their service and get your free audiobook. It's as simple as that. All right, let's get to it. Let's learn from the very best. It's time to speak to Callum Skinner.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Callum Skinner, welcome to The Best in the World with Richard Parr. Now, when I was doing my homework about you, I found out that it was the 2004 Games that inspired you for cycling, in particular what Chris Hoy was up to. And when you were winning your gold medal in the 2016 Games at Rio, did you ever think that you might be doing the same to a new generation of cyclists, or do you not get a time to think about anything like that?
No, people ask us quite a lot. Do you think about the people that you could be, inspiring back at home? Because, as you said correctly, I was kind of, intrigued by the venue and the sport from watching the game myself. But the truth is that when you're there, you're just so focused on your job in hand that you don't really have time to think about what might happen, back home. But I mean, it's something that you can devote a bit of time to afterwards. And I think that's something I did after the games a little bit, was go down to kind of a few little cycling clubs and things like that, just to hopefully kind of capitalise on any interest that was there.
So tell us what is going through your mind that day. Tell us the whole build up to the day and kind of what you're doing and what you're up to.
Well, we tend to race towards kind of late afternoon, so we have a lot of the day just to kind of waste in essence in the morning. So I think a lot of the time that's about trying to stay relaxed. I think a lot of people can get quite twitchy and quite angsty when they have a lot of time in the day before they're due to compete. It's a bit like if you have to compete early in the morning, not being able to get to sleep the night before. So that's what's quite nice about the team event being first, is that you have two other guys to kind of bounce off of and keep ourselves entertained until the race in the evening. But we tend to just kind of keep switched off We don't tend to talk about the competition or the race. We just tend to keep relaxed. We might have some kind of like activation effort in the morning, and then that'll be it really. And the coaches kind of leave us to our own devices as well. It's just about staying relaxed and then giving it your full dedication in the afternoon.
So are they like distraction tactics, or do you watch a box set, or do you just go for a run? Like how do you stop yourself from thinking about something you've been working for so long?
To be honest, usually we just kind of lip into each other, which it distracts us a little bit. But no, I think like we all got a bit keen on. I mean, we tend to get keen on some games or something like that. So we all got a bit attached to a game called Civilization at the games, which is excellent for wasting time. But yeah, I think that's what's quite nice about being in a team. I think I'd maybe struggle a little bit more if I was just by myself, left with my own thoughts before a kind of major event like that.
Who was the best on the game?
I don't know. I'd like to say myself, but we're all pretty competitive, so they'd probably say each other as well. But yeah, no. To be honest, we weren't really. You couldn't play multiplayer. We were just kind of all sitting there playing individual against the computer, so it was a bit difficult to compare, to be honest.
I think in the next Olympics, I'm going to try and go there with a camera and film all of the athletes playing computer games, because the Olympic hockey team also did the same. So I think there was like this sub-competition of lots of computer game playing going on in between.
We had a bit of an interesting thing going on, actually, because our head coach at the time wasn't too keen on athletes kind of using their phones in we call it the track centre. So it's basically the kind of the field of play where we all sit and wait to get on the track. And that was the same in training and things like that. But I think that was something that a lot of the athletes tend to push back against, because it's a great distraction to kind of take your mind off of the job in hand. Because sometimes overthinking something can become a bit of a distraction itself. So yeah, you're right saying that there's a lot of athletes kind of with their head in their phones, their head in their games, but it's usually just a bit of distraction.
With that, I was recently listening to an audiobook with Ariana Huffington talking about the amount of time people are looking at their phones and how late they can look at them. Have you ever been given any recommendations by any psychologists or by performance coaches saying how many hours you should look at it? Maybe you need to switch screens off after a certain time, or do they just trust you as an adult?
No, I'd say for me, I treat it in phases. I'd say, like after the games where there's lots going on, and you've got plenty of time to socialise, and, go out and enjoy yourself. I'm really not going to be playing any games at all. But then when it comes to, it has a time and a place. I think when it comes to a taper, people always say before the Olympics, oh, you must be training more, but in fact we end up training less, but the quality gets higher. But what it means is that the time between sessions, you're really expected to stay off your feet and not really do anything at all. You're not meant to go out for dinner. You're not meant to kind of go out and socialise. You're meant to just kind of sit around in the cover. So that's where screens in essence become really handy. But I think it's important that stays periodised. So as you say, we don't. I'm not someone who's glued to my phone 24/7. It just has a time and a place when necessary.
And when you've got access to the internet and you're competing and everything like that, do you ever look up what other people think about what you've been doing at all?
I'd say, because I guess that's the old trap that some people look at derogatory comments, don't they? And it throws them off. I'd say I'm fortunate enough never to have really received any trolling. Not massively anyway. So it's never really been that much of a distraction. But I'd say usually when I get to the track, I'll put my phone into airplane mode, and that'll be it really. So I don't get any distractions from texts from family or friends. So I essentially just use my phone as a timer and as an iPod from that point on.
Okay, very interesting. Now you mentioned that in the build up to the games, the training kind of tapers down a little bit. When it's at its highest point, what is a typical training day for you, like, Callum?
It'd probably be quite similar to what we had yesterday. So that would be gym in the morning, which is usually from 10 until 12, and then track, which would be from 2 till 5. So the gym tends to be pretty much exclusively lower body for us. So if you imagine your kind of typical guy at the gym who has a huge upper body and tiny legs, we're basically the opposite of that. We look like kind of upside down triangles in that essence. And then for a track, which is one of the nicer bits about sprinting in essence, is that we'll actually only do from 2 to 5. We'll actually only do maybe 4 efforts in that session, and the rest of the time we'll be sitting around the covering, which kind of hones into this kind of the sprint nature of the sport. But that bit's quite nice because you can always catch up with your teammates, and it creates a real good kind of atmosphere in the track. That amount of time in between efforts, which is kind of the upside to it. But I will say we do work hard for those 4 efforts, and after each and every one of them, you might be kind of on the floor in a pool of sweat, and you'd be asking for more than half an hour's rest in between those.
Yeah, when you're doing that, when you're doing the sprint, like I once read or was given a bit of advice that you could actually do a marathon and only trained for it using sprints and stuff. Do you ever do any kind of longer cycling? Do you ever do any kind of long rides, or does that not help you at all?
No, it has a place. I think it's where the sport's in a bit of a transition phase where we used to have maybe like 4 hours a week on the road, but now that's reduced to sometimes even as little as an hour to 45 minutes a week. But it depends. It depends which nation. I think some of the nations are still really keen on it. We're becoming less keen on it, and other nations are even less keen on it than us. But we did used to do kind of camps in Mallorca, in the winter, and we'd be doing kind of maybe 5 hours maximum a day. And they're really great fun, but we're not always quite sure if that's specifically applicable to sprint. So yeah, it's a bit of a transition phase at the moment.
When did you make the commitment to track cycling? Was there ever only going to be time for you to do any road cycling at all, or were you always focused on track cycling ever since those 2004 games?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. I think people, especially in cycling, are quite surprised that I was quite set on track sprint early on, because I think a lot of people who come to cycling end up wanting doing naturally want to do the Tour de France. But for me, seeing track cycling, that was what kind of really grabbed me. And there's a few things that kind of really kind of cemented me into that element of the sport. The first bit is the kind of controllable nature, and what I mean by that is that I can do an effort which lasts 10 seconds, and then I can immediately know whether that was better or worse than last week, or better or worse than ones I've ever done. And the difference between that and road cycling is that road cycling is often based on your competitors, and you might actually not really know if you're getting better or worse from day to day. It's really quite tricky to figure out where you are. And the second element of why I stuck with track sprint was because it was really quite a nice speed sensation. Anyone who knows looking at a track, the bankings are kind of 48 degrees. It allows you to go really fast on quite a tight corner, and it gives you a little kind of G-force sensation as you whip down the track. And as like a 14-year-old who's quite keen on speed, that was just what really kind of grabbed me about it. And then there was also the social element that I mentioned earlier. I think that develops a real community within the sprint sport, especially, is that if you're training with someone, you really get to know them, because, to be honest, most of the time you're spent sitting around the covering and chatting.
Were you ever scared when you first went on the track?
Yeah, no, I still am today, to be honest. It's not that I'm bad with heights, but I think there's always something in the back of your mind that knows that you could slip from the top if you go a little bit too slow, and at that point you've got a lot of splinters and a lot of burns to deal with. But I'd say for me, it's something that really switches off when I'm racing, which is quite strange. So you'll see in the match sprint, it can be quite tactical, quite kind of cat and mouse is what everyone tends to call it. So one of the tactics someone might use if they're at the front is to go as slow as they can on the banking to force the guy behind to take the front. But if I'm in two and I really want the back, I'll go as slow as they will. And this slipping off just to keep that position. It's something that really switches off when you're racing, because you just want to beat your opponent, basically.
Yeah, sounds pretty scary. What's the worst crash that you've had?
The worst one I've had was probably, it wasn't actually that bad in the end. But so again, if you look at the velodrome, you've got the banking on your right hand side, and then which is fine if you fall to your right, because it's not actually that far to fall. But if you fall to your left, it's quite a way to fall. So I fell to my left and snapped my collarbone in half.
Oh.
Yeah. But to be honest, it really wasn't too bad. It was better. I'll take that over the back injury any day, because I got in for surgery maybe a day or two after. It was a plate and 6 screws. Luckily, it was a clean break right in the middle, so there's plenty of space to plate it, and was back on the bike within 2-3 days after that as well.
Wow.
So yeah, I can recommend baking a collarbone right in the middle. But I mean, other people bake it or something like that, and it's a bit trickier. But if you've got a real kind of clean, simple bake, it's really not that bad at all.
And the doctor was fine with you getting back on the bike 3 days later?
Yeah, it was quite tentative. We kind of, you've got to be careful with the effects of the anaesthetic and stuff like that. But more or less, you're pretty much good to go for a steady pedal after that.
Now, while we're talking about injuries and we're talking about being in doctors' surgeries and things like that, we've got to talk about what happened in 2011, year before the London Olympics. You found a lump on your neck. Fortunately, they later found out that it wasn't cancerous. Just tell us all about that experience, Callum, because that sounds more scary than going on a track at any time.
Yeah, and it puts things into perspective a lot of the time as well. I think it helps through my career today. But it was quite a dark time for my family because I learned about that time my grandfather just died of cancer as well. So basically, I'd had the weekend at home and came to the track, and I was going to go and see the doctor because I had quite a big lump on one side of my neck. And then the doctor wasn't in, so the physio saw it and said, that doesn't look great. We'll probably just send you to A&E. And British Cycling, as I'm sure a lot of sports teams do, have contacts in A&E just to make sure that they're, so they can keep up to date with athletes and stuff like that. So I was treated pretty well. Saw the head of A&E pretty quickly, and he said to me after doing an ultrasound, a blood test, and kind of just a bit of an observation, and tying that up with my age and the fact that I've been having night sweats for about a week or so. He said to me that basically he was pretty sure that it was cancer, and that it was lymphoma, and that it was going to be quite serious, and he really wanted me to see a specialist pretty quickly. So this is when I was about 18 years old, and I hadn't been away from home for very long. So it was my coach who was with me at the time when I got that initial news, and then my mum drove down that day from Edinburgh, just for a bit of support and stuff like that. But no, it was quite tricky because I think especially when you're young, and I think also the position that I was put in with, because I trust the BC medical team very highly, and for them to recommend the A&E doctor, and also that kind of trust transfers. I kind of really trust him as well. So I took his opinion pretty seriously, and that wasn't great. So then I got referred to the specialist, who also was pretty concerned. We went for more blood tests, which again was still pointing towards that diagnosis. I had a needle biopsy, which isn't particularly pleasant. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. It's basically where they take a syringe and put it into the bit that they want to take the biopsy from, and they scrape the cells off as well as pulling the punch. But because it's in your neck, you can hear it scrape, which isn't very nice at all. But yeah, so we did that, and then surprisingly that one came back negative. But they weren't really convinced, so they called me back in for a second needle biopsy, of which that also came back negative. So then we went back to the consultant, and she still really wasn't too convinced. She wanted me to go for a full biopsy because they were convinced that it was still cancer. But at that point we opted not to. And then she pretty much said that she would have put money on that's being what she thought it was. So it was basically just a month that was really quite uncertain and not particularly great. But obviously it was great to get the diagnosis in the end that it was apparently atypical glandular fever.
Wow.
But not a great time for me or my family. But yeah, thankfully the diagnosis came up negative in the end.
And during that month, was there just no training, or was training some way which in some ways helped you because it made you not think about it? Like, how did the rest of your life go on during that month? Because mentally, you must have been all over the place.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, it was one of these things where I'd kind of prepared myself for the diagnosis, and I knew that it was, there's in terms of how cancers go, the one that they thought it was, there's a 99% survival rate. I'm fit and healthy, and regardless of whether it is or isn't, I can get through this. And then also, but yeah, to be honest, I did do a bit of training. It all kind of came crashing to a stop, and I just started doing what I enjoyed on the bike, which was kind of just going out on the road and when it was sunny and when it suited me, really. But I think that's always quite a nice escape. It's a great way to clear your head, is to go out on the bike just by yourself and have some space, really. And it's something that I still do today when things aren't going too well. It's just to get out on the bike and clear my head. So yeah, it did have a place.
Well, it's so good that you were given the all clear, and obviously 5 years later, you get a gold medal. So it's an amazing story there, Callum. Let's talk about the start of your cycling career. Now, you watch those 2004 games, and for a lot of people, they wouldn't know where to start track cycling. How easy was it for you to get going once you've kind of been inspired?
No, it's a bit of a coincidence because as a kid, I kind of because there was a breakup in my family, so I kind of was born in Glasgow, was there until about 6, and then was in Dunfermline from till about 12, and then I moved to Edinburgh from about 12 till 17, and it was through that move to Edinburgh that I was finally kind of given the opportunity to ride the track, because at the time that was the only banked wooden velodrome in Scotland, but it didn't go smoothly, because the first time I went down was in the autumn, and I showed up and they said, "Oh, this is the last session of the season because we close over the winter." So I came back another 6 months later and gave it a go, and was just hooked from that point on. But yeah, it really was just a bit of a coincidence through the circumstance of my family moving to Edinburgh that kind of really gave me the chance to give it a go. But I mean, I think that really kind of makes me want to push for the growth of the facilities and the growth of the sport throughout the UK, because I find it really difficult to suggest to like an 8-year-old budding cyclist to go out on the road and mix with the traffic if he's a keen cyclist, because it's not safe. But what I can wholeheartedly recommend them to do is go onto a track or a closed traffic environment, get up their confidence, and then go out on the road and do whatever they like. So these facilities are they're not just essential for bringing sport through, they're essential for, helping the NHS, helping the environment. It's a whole bigger picture thing that I think facilities can bring to the benefit of the country.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully with the success which British cycling continues to get, that people will start to help improve that as well. Of course, yeah. What you guys did was absolutely incredible. Now, I want to talk about your family life. Now, it has been documented before that your parents split up while you were growing up. Did that affect your training? Did that affect your goals in any way?
No, I'd say, well, I was 6 when they split up, so it didn't particularly really. I'd say I kind of naturally gravitated a bit closer to my mum through those early days when I was kind of breaking through in the sport, because she's really athletic and was a really good swimmer back in the day. And my dad is far more similar to my brother, where he kind of likes to smoke and a drink and likes to enjoy himself a little bit more than I do. So I really kind of gravitated more towards my mum in those earlier years, because she had a bank of knowledge I could really kind of tap into in that essence. But no, I wouldn't really say it affected it. I say there was a little bit of anxiety in the early years about having mum and dad come and watch in the same venue at the same time. But apart from that, no, it really wasn't much of an issue, to be honest. But
they were both there for 2016, is that right?
Yeah, they were, and that was a great moment, actually. So my mum, my dad, my stepdad, and my brother were all there together. So it was really great to share that moment with all of them.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Don't worry, we've got more from Callum in just a few moments, but I want to tell you about Sportacino. Sportacino is the video cast that I produce at sportacino.com. Every single day we've got a new little bit of nugget for you, a 30-minute daily video cast all about sports, health and fitness. Mondays and Fridays, we're talking about all the big weekend action that has happened and is happening. On a Tuesday, we specifically look at fitness, health, and nutrition. On a Wednesday, we talk wrestling, in particular WWE, and on a Thursday we look at the world of business and how it relates to sport. So that could be media, that could be tech, that could be apps, that could be gadgets, that could be rights, it could be all kinds of things, and that is every Thursday. We're live at 3 p.m. British Standard Time, that's 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Go check it out and let me know what you think. All right, that is Sportacino at sportacino.com. All right, let's return to the conversation with the best in the world. It's Callum Skinner.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Yeah, let's fast right back forward to 2016, because this was your first Olympics. Even forgetting about competing, what was that like for you? Just the experience of being in Rio.
Yeah, it was crazy. I think it was. I think the Commonwealth Games is kind of like a stepping stone on the way to what the experience is like, but it really still doesn't prepare you fully for how intense and how big the games are in comparison to the Commonwealth Games. I think like a good example was we were just sitting in the village in our blocks. In our apartment block, and all the village throughout the villages, like the odd tennis court and the odd swimming pool and stuff like that. And you just look out the window and you see Novak Djokovic practicing with Boris Becker, and all of a sudden there's a huge crowd packed down the tennis court and really enjoying what they're doing. It was just that kind of surreal moment, and you'd be walking along and you see Usain Bolt or you see Michael Phelps and things like that, and it was just a whole new level of kind of profile and kind of intensity almost. But I'd say that only kind of really started to sink in after the event was finished. I'd say beforehand we were so focused that anyone could have walked past and we wouldn't really have cared because we were just there to do our job. And then afterwards you can get soaked up in the game's experience. But yeah, there's a new level of intensity because everyone who's there is of a pretty serious level and is pretty seriously looking to win or at least medal. And also there's a higher profile of guys there as well. So it was an incredible atmosphere to be in. And it's really quite tricky to try and describe it to other people. And then almost when the games are finished, it's almost like someone's just let off the steam valve of all these athletes, and they've behaved themselves so well for at least 6 months before, abstaining from like partying or drinking or anything like that. They'll be in the best shape of their lives. They've monitored the diet so carefully, and then win, lose or draw, they all want to just completely let loose. And I feel a bit sorry for the athletes that have to compete on the last day, because you'll see towards the end, people stop wearing team kit. People start to look a bit dishevelled, especially if you get in the food hall early in the morning. You start to see people coming in from nights out afterwards. So if I was competing on the last day, I'd probably start to lose my focus a little bit. But luckily, we're in the middle. So yeah, it's a crazy little kind of village in essence. It's an amazing place.
Yeah, I think someone else described it very similar to you on the podcast. I can't remember who it was, and I think we both compared it to when everyone's studying at university and they finally finish their exams and then all go a little bit crazy. Did you get any photos of any of some of these other famous athletes, or did you play it cool, or weren't interested at all?
I'm not one for the photos, Louis. I don't know. I think I felt a bit sorry for Usain Bolt actually, because he was walking along and there was in the food hall, and he's got his cap on and his hood up and his sunglasses on and headphones on as well. So he couldn't make it clear that he doesn't really want to speak to anyone, which I completely understand. And you have him literally tripping over athletes who are jumping in front of him trying to get a selfie with him. So I mean, you can see the darker side of that, and I'm just quite happy to leave them to it. And I'm not I'll just leave them to that one. I think there's other athletes that are pretty keen on the photos, and that's fair enough to them.
Some athletes don't like to stay in the village. Would you go back to the village?
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's a great place. I think some athletes complain about the food or something like that as well. But I think there's something quite nice about everyone being in the same boat. That's why I think it's sometimes a bit to the detriment of the sport when you have like the American basketball team not staying in the village. I think it's better when everyone's in the same boat all together, and because it really harvests that kind of community spirit, which again is what the Olympics is about. And as much as people complain about the food, if we're all in the same boat, we're all eating the same food, then it's not a disadvantage to anyone. I think it's important that we all kind of get behind the village.
So, what is your typical diet like? What are you eating most days, Callum?
It's really just quite protein heavy. So we have a lot of muscle mass in our legs that we have to try and maintain. So that'll be kind of 8 solid portions of protein a day, and that would be 20 grams of protein in each of those portions. So yeah, it's kind of drilled into us is just always to be thinking about protein, so our body's not without it. But to be honest, I'm kind of tend to be a bit more independent on this than some of the other athletes. Basically, we're kind of monitored at least every month with something called the DEXA scan, which uses X-rays to determine your how much of your even down to your limbs, how much of your your limbs are kind of body fat, lean muscle, and also your bone density and bone structure. But then we also have more traditional skin folds, and basically, as long as those don't get too out of kilter, you're pretty much free to do what you want, and you can tap into the nutritionist as much as you like for kind of the kind of well-being side of it, and what you can do to kind of make yourself a kind of healthier and better athlete.
So, what are your vices? What are the foods which you sometimes sneak in?
I've tripped up onto. No, I don't know. I'm quite. It's a bit of a funny one. I'm not really kind of set on one thing. I just kind of. We're a bit. I live with another cyclist called Kieran Amadi actually, and we literally live above a Sainsbury's, so that can be a bit of a temptation sometimes because we just pop down and we kind of treat it as our pantry basically because it's by. So there's always a kind of plethora of bad foods to treat yourself to down there. But no, I wouldn't say no to donuts and burgers though.
Yeah, I think it's always good. Would that be as like a cheat day, or would that just be as like a little extra you could fit in on a training day?
No, not. To be honest, I try and stay away from them as much as I can. Especially, now we're kind of 3 weeks towards World Championships. They really expect you to kind of tighten up a little bit. So yeah, as much as your phone is kind of periodized between kind of getting yourself entrenched into a video game and not, I think for me, I'm quite good at periodizing times when I can really focus on my diet and times when I can kind of let loose a little bit.
Now, you spoke earlier about your team and how close you were, and the three of you winning that team sprint gold medal in an Olympic time. Absolutely amazing. And you spoke about your friendship and camaraderie. Obviously, you then faced Jason in the final of the individual sprint. How difficult or how strange is it to go from being so close to having such a good friendship with someone to realising that they are your direct rival between gold and silver?
I'd say, to be honest, there's always a direct rivalry even within the team. I think although there's only 3 guys who get to go to the games, there's another 3, 4, 5 guys back home who you've been in competition with for the last, let's say even 4 years to show your hand as best you can to get selected for that team. So competing with teammates isn't always as unusual as everyone might think. But to be honest, by the point we got to the sprint major final, I think for me that was it was basically just kind of like a bonus because the sprint and the Keirin, which my other 2 events after the team sprint, we really hadn't focused on at all, and that's because we couldn't afford to. Basically, to be honest, I was the weak link in the team when it came to the World Championships previously, and I knew that, and that's where I knew and my coaches knew that all we had to focus on was team sprint, so we could get that gold medal, and that's ultimately what we did. But I'd say, as I was coming through my career, sprint was always one of my favourite events, and it was something that I feel quite comfortable in. So I kind of felt as if I had a good chance as well. But yeah, it was strange because Jason was also my roommate in the village. So not only are we teammates, we're kind of sleeping in the same room, and it's the last person I see when I go to sleep, and it's going to be the first person I see when I wake up before an Olympic final. But I mean, even that, I think the best we deal with it as we do with all the other kind of tense situations. It's kind of just a bit of a laugh and a joke, really, whilst we're out of the velodrome. So I remember, I'd basically, so our beds it's like a twin room basically in the village. So, I'd say, okay, I'm definitely going to sleep now, and kind of switch off the lights, and then kind of flick him back on 30 seconds later, and I'd be staring straight at him. and say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going to go to sleep now. I'm going to go to sleep now. And then he'd say something about how strong he's feeling and how amazing he's feeling, and I'd say, oh yeah, it's going to be so easy for me tomorrow. I think it would just be a breeze. I'm really strong as well, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think through kind of comedy and laughter is kind of the way that we kind of diffuse any kind of tension that would be there. And then once we kind of set foot in the velodrome, the jokes stop and it's kind of game face on, and that was similar to our approach for team sprint as well. It's kind of a little bit of distraction in the time that you have to deal with, and then a firm focus when you get to the venue, and it's all about the job in hand.
That's great, because it's while you're both trying to wind each other up in some ways, it's relaxing both of you at the same time. No, that's fantastic. How did you feel when you got the silver?
Yeah, no, to be honest, although from the point of the gold medal onwards, anything was a bonus, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit disappointed not to win. But I think that's something that's just kind of in the DNA of every athlete at that level, is that, if you're in a race, you wouldn't do the race unless you thought you had a chance of winning. And I especially thought after the way the semi-finals went, where I got through pretty clean with 2 straight wins, and Jason had to go to best of 3, that I kind of felt like the momentum was in my court, and that maybe I had a chance of winning. But ultimately, thinking realistically, at the end of the day, I was up against the reigning Olympic champion, someone who's probably one of the best the sport's ever seen in terms of Olympic results, and also someone who qualified faster than me. So the result, reflected, who was best in the day. But I think as an athlete, you're always going into a race thinking you want to win. So ultimately, I'm kind of, I'm really happy with the silver, but it's something that next time I'd want to remedy, especially if we end up in the same position at Tokyo. I'd love to come away with that gold.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. I've just got one more question before we go. Now, you won that gold medal, you won the silver medal. Amazing highs from Rio. How long did those highs last? And then when did you take stock, take a moment, reflect, and then also start to plan the next 4-year cycle?
Yeah, I'd say you're probably kind of asking about the inevitable low that comes after that high. And I think that kind of comes, for me, it came maybe like 3 weeks after. So basically, I mean, I had some of the best days of my life after those games. After the games were finished, and it's basically, I'd love to be able to, the cant and remember all of it, but to be honest, most of it's quite hazy, because it was just one big party from the day the competition finished to the day we got on the plane home. And I think that's so important in a way, just to release that stress that was maybe even subconsciously there. Because I think ultimately, looking back, and part of what I found in my reflections was that there was like a hell of a lot of pressure on me, and this was something that the team psychologist said as well, that there was so much pressure on you, and that came from a few avenues. That was the fact that we were reigning Olympic champions in that team sprint, as well as winning the one before in Beijing. Jason and Phil, my teammates, were also reigning Olympic champions, and everyone knew that, as I said earlier, I was the weak link in that team. If you go by the World Championships and the World Championships before that, and then also that I was filling the shoes of Chris Hoy. I was taking up his lanes in that position, and obviously everyone knows how successful he is. So there was a huge, only looking back, there was a huge amount of pressure, and it could have been a complete disaster. I could have got dropped when Jason and Phil set off, which is what happened at Worlds in essence, and that pretty much scuppers any chances of me doing a good lap. And then, if you look at that, you'd see that Jason today wouldn't be Britain's most successful Olympian, because we wouldn't have won. I would have felt like I would have, let down the boys, because they were obviously on good enough form to be able to pick up another gold. It could have been a complete disaster, personally, and luckily it wasn't. So I think it takes a little while to relieve that stress that was obviously there. And it was Chris Boardman that actually sent me a direct message on Twitter after we'd won the gold, and he said, there was no one in that velodrome last night who had more pressure on them than you, and you performed, well done. And I think that was probably the start of that initial reflection, that it'd been such a hard ride to get to that point. It'd been putting so much work, as a team, and for it all to come off just kind of made the victory even sweeter. But yeah, that kind of elation and that high that you get having all that work pay off, lasted for maybe kind of 3 weeks, where you think you're Olympic champion, you don't have a care in the world, everything's rosy and dandy, and you're basically just kind of looking about who's going out tonight and what's going to be going on tonight, basically, and that kind of thing. But that does kind of come to a bit of a low eventually. And I'm not even sure if it is a low. I think it might just be reality. I think it's because you're at such a high that even coming back down to kind of like an average level seems like a low by comparison. So that can be quite difficult to deal with, I think, sometimes. And you realise that all the problems that you thought you'd left behind are essentially still there. And that if you want to continue to win medals, you're going to have to continue to put the work in, and that people are now going to start expecting results of you as well because of that newfound kind of result of the Olympics. So it takes a little while to get your head around. And the thing that I found best for me was that I'd had a month of, after the games, the month was really busy with kind of sponsorship commitments, family commitments, friends commitments, media stuff. And what I did was I said to my coach, I think I need to get away from it all because it's all just getting a bit too much. It's just getting a bit too busy. So I went off to Australia, which was perfect because I spent a month there. I got to train with the Australian team, which was really good of them. I got to see another side of the sport, and also the time difference was big enough that no one could really bother me or call me, and the distance was long enough that I didn't have to fly back for any appearances or anything like that as well. And essentially all I did out there was it was like what I did with my cancer scare. I just went out and rode my bike when I felt like it in the sunshine, and just had the best time ever. And it was that kind of love for the sport that kind of got me out of that phase. Because essentially I just love riding my bike, and that's when I decided that this is something I want to continue to do. In my opinion, I've got one of the best jobs in the world, and why would I want to stop now? And eventually you end up finding that. And so in Australia, I kind of found my love for the sport again, and then in South Africa, which I went away for 2 months after that, was when I really kind of found my love for kind of competition and competing and wanting to win more medals at Tokyo kind of came back. But yeah, I wasn't in that position where I won Olympic gold and then immediately thought, I'm going to Tokyo and I want more. It was a longer process than that, and now I'm in contention for the World Champs coming up in 3 weeks, and just in a really good place and looking to build on the results that I picked up in the summer.
Absolutely amazing story, Callum. I'm so glad you're in that place. We can't wait to see you competing at the World Championships and in Tokyo in 2020. I'm sure more great success is in front of you. Just before you go, Callum, can you let us know how we can continue to follow you on social media, on Twitter and anything like that, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm most active on Twitter. You can sift through the nonsense and you get some decent cycling stuff every now and again. My Twitter handle's at Callum Skinner, double L, but I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but most active on Twitter.
All right, we will check it out. Callum Skinner, thank you for being on the programme, and thank you for being the best in the world.
Thanks.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.
Wonderful chat there with Callum Skinner, but he wasn't the first track cyclist to have appeared on the podcast. That was Andy Tennant. I believe that was episode 4. Go back and check that out. Also, if you enjoy your two-wheeled sports, you might also want to go back and listen to the recent interview with the BMX champion, Connor Fields. He was on, I think, 2 episodes ago. He won Olympic gold at Rio de Janeiro as well. Both fantastic interviews that you can listen to. And the whole back catalogue is on Acast and it's on iTunes. And while you're on iTunes, if you get a moment to subscribe and give us a rating and review, that would really help the show. I'd really appreciate that. On next week's programme, we speak to the Olympic swimming champion, Larry Kraselberg. It's a fantastic interview. You don't want to miss it. When's it out? Next Wednesday, of course, on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Acast. It's the best in the world with Richard Parr. But until then, have a great week.
The Best in the World podcast with Richard Parr.